Hey class, today we are going to be talking about absolute rule in Russia, and we're going to be focusing on Ivan the Terrible. This is again part of Unit 4, the Age of Absolutism. So, as we think about this kind of topic for today, I want to bring up our discussion that we had a while back about Niccolo Machiavelli in his book The Prince, where he posed the question, is it better to be feared or loved? And my question for you today is, do you believe that absolute monarchs who are trying to maintain power should be feared or loved? Do you think a ruler like Louis XIV, who we have talked about previously, was feared or loved? And really just thinking about how do we maintain the power that we have? How do these absolute rulers control their countries? Are they using fear, or are they using kind of love and encouragement as ways to have the support of the people around them? So let's get into it. Now, a little background on Russia and Russian history at the time is that Russia was a little bit left out in some ways. So while most of Europe, Italy, France, England, Germany, while they're living through things like the Renaissance, the Reformation, Russia is struggling under the rule of the Mongols. So all of the 1200s, 1400s, and even into the 1500s, Russia is basically conquered by another group of people. They don't have the same kind of independence they want, and in many ways they are shut out from kind of partaking in what's happening in the rest of Europe. So this, the Mongols come in around the 1200s, but by the 1500s, where we really pick up our story, the Mongols had been removed. The Golden Horde was no longer in power, but it left Russia in an interesting spot where they are not quite like a lot of their neighbors, and I think they wish to be. And this is where Ivan the Terrible is going to come in. He is going to be an absolute ruler in Russia. He's really going to set the stage for kind of coming rulers afterwards. And he is going to take on the name of Tsar. So in Russia, for a long time, their rulers take on that name, Tsar. And you'll see here, I've spelled it T-S-A-R. You will see it spelled a couple different ways. I have it listed down here. A lot of times you'll see it with a Z, or you'll see it starting with a C-Z-A-R or C-S-A-R. And the root word of that comes from the Roman word Caesar. Caesar was the name of kind of one specific ruler, but then a lot of other rulers in the Roman Empire took on that name as well. And this is kind of Russia's way of hearkening back to kind of the greatness of Rome that a lot of places kind of do. So we're going to talk about Ivan the Terrible. He's a controlling ruler. He's kind of strict, but he is going to set the stage for future rulers. Now, I also want to bring up this idea of his name. Now, we call him Ivan the Terrible, and a lot of names in history like that, kind of the Terrible or the Great, those kind of names usually come afterwards, right? After that ruler is dead. So Ivan's name, Terrible, does come after he's dead, but it's interesting because it's kind of a bit of a translation error. Terrible, how we think of it as like bad or just disgusting, is not really a good translation of terrible in this case. It's really more so like fearsome or formidable, and I think that is a very fitting name for Ivan. So, how does he start out? Well, just like others, he is a baby king. At the age of 3, he inherits the throne as the Prince of Moscow, and Moscow is the center of Russia politically and culturally at this time. So he gets that title at the age of 3. His mother is going to rule as the regent until he turns 8 years old. But after her death, Ivan is going to be in a bit of a tough spot. So essentially what happens is there are groups of Russian nobles who are known as boyars. And you will see that in Russian history, Russian literature, they will refer just to the boyars. The boyars essentially are going to act as regents until he turns 17 and he is able to take control for himself. But that 9 years, from the time he turns 8, when his mother dies, to the time he turns 17 and takes control for himself, these boyars are going to, A, be in charge of Ivan, but B, they're going to be running the country. The issue is that these boyars do not, A, get along with each other, so the boyars are constantly causing more issues within Russia as they are competing for power and influence. They're also going to really mistreat Ivan. There are a lot of stories Ivan wrote in his journal and some of the books that were published after he died about just how he was being mistreated. They were bullying him, taking toys from him, at times forcing him to starve. So Ivan does not grow up in a very loving home. But at the same time, those nobles do not remove him from power. They do allow him to continue growing, which is going to be beneficial. Ivan does make it to the ripe age of 17, and he becomes the Tsar. Now, Ivan's early years is really where I think he kind of doesn't match the name the Terrible. His early years, he does a pretty good job of improving Russia. He works to centralize the Russian government by adding some different government facilities and agencies in, trying to make it a more unified country as opposed to a bunch of kind of disparate, kingdoms and realms that technically work together. He's trying to make it real unified. He's adding a new legal system and improving the legal system. He's doing things like building massive churches, including this one right here. This is one of the most iconic churches in the world, called St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow. Building cathedrals is, top 10 ways that European rulers try to make themselves look good. Legend has it that he blinded the architect of this cathedral so he could never make something so beautiful again. But I don't know if I can believe that. That tends to be a pretty common legend around famous buildings. But so Ivan is doing good things early on. He's even modernizing Russia through technology. He brings the first printing presses into Russia in 1553. Again, this is about 100 years after the printing press was invented, so it takes a little bit of time to get it over to Russia, but now Russia is going to be able to spread out newspapers, spread laws and things like that, as well as print religious texts, all sorts of things. And so with the printing press, he's able to spread information across the country, which is beneficial, especially as an absolute ruler. You want people educated on your rules. Secondly, he brings gunpowder weapons into Russia. He wants to modernize the military, introducing gunpowder into their arsenal. And they're able to actually use these gunpowder weapons to defeat some of their enemies along their southern border, especially where like modern day Kazakhstan is. So he's doing some really good things. Ivan the Chill. And so this question here is, why does Ivan need to modernize Russia when he came to power? It's because Russia's behind. He is trying to match some of these other European powers that have been going through the Renaissance. To the south of them is like the Ottoman Empire, which is the most powerful empire in the world at the time, or one of the most powerful empires in the world. So his neighbors are all improving, and he wants to make Russia kind of match them. Second part of the question is, what do you think would be better for improving Russia, printing press or gunpowder? It kind of depends. Gunpowder is definitely going to be good for securing the borders and possibly gaining more territory, which is always a good thing. But the printing press is going to have kind of almost exponential improvements, right? Not only can people learn more from, or can they read more from the printing press, but they're going to learn new technologies from that reading, and it's going to kind of build momentum into the technology side of things. But they're both going to be useful, and Ivan clearly sees that. Now, Ivan is going to enter into his terrible phase at a certain point. Essentially, there were a series of betrayals. Some of the high officials who were working with Ivan are betraying him or kind of turning against him, and Ivan starts to become paranoid. He starts to become afraid of sharing this power that he has gained. He doesn't want other people taking power away from him. He's afraid of being stabbed in the back. We could also say that probably some of this comes from his childhood, growing up with the boyars mistreating him. He doesn't have a whole lot of trust for these boyars at this point. So he proclaims that as the Tsar of Russia, he has the right to condemn, punish, and execute anyone who he sees as a traitor. So anyone who he cannot trust personally, he is willing to condemn, punish, and execute them. Now, this becomes an issue because he also starts to develop his own loyal police force called the Oprichnina. Now, these are people who are loyal directly to Ivan. They're not loyal to the country of Russia. They don't have all these nationalist feelings about, oh, we got to make Russia protected. It's, what does Ivan want me to do, and I will do it. These police forces are brutal. The Oprichnina are famous for burning down houses, murdering people, raping people, doing whatever they see fit, because Ivan is giving them free rein to do whatever he wants them to do. Ivan says, hey, I need you to go straighten out this person. The Oprichnina might take that to mean we got to beat him up, take his stuff, may possibly rape his children, or not children, but his wives, things like that that could really be issues. But because those people are just loyal to Ivan, they go do it, they come back, Ivan's going to pay them, he's going to treat them well, he's going to give them land and property and protect them, and uses this as a way to maintain his power. He starts targeting boyars, anyone who he can't personally trust or anybody he thinks is going to betray them, he is going to personally send out to kill, torture, and obviously murder those people. So it is these secret police forces, this private police force, is a way to kind of keep people down. They understand that if they try and do something, if they try and stand up to Ivan, they have a high likelihood of dying themselves. And this reaches a kind of breaking point. The highest point here is going to involve the city of Novgorod. Novgorod is north of Moscow. It's a prominent city at this time. It's wealthy. It's a city that's involved in a lot of good trade. And so in many ways, Novgorod and some of the leaders in Novgorod feel like there's no reason they should be a part of the Russian Empire. They feel like they should either do their own thing. They're not really fans of Ivan. They don't really want to listen to Ivan. And some of them start suggesting that they should throw their support behind Lithuania, which is a competitive or a competing kingdom at the time. Lithuania is bordering Russia. And so Novgorod is like, well, we should just, in essence, join Lithuania. We'll, kind of bow to the king of Lithuania, and then we will be a part of their kingdom instead. Now, Ivan is obviously pissed off by this. For one, he feels like he's being betrayed, right? You're going to go support my rival. So Ivan says, if you're not going to support me, you're not going to support anybody. So to prevent this from happening, Ivan sends his Oprichnina, that private police force, and they go and sack the city before they're able to betray him. They surround the city, they burn, they loot, they destroy over the course of several weeks. Novgorod is a largely wooden city. It's not built out of bricks or stone. And so Novgorod burns to the ground, and it never becomes quite as valuable, as big and prominent as it was back then. It is still a pretty big city in Russia today, but we can imagine it would be much larger. It's estimated that 60,000 victims are killed in Novgorod just by these private police forces. 60,000 people. And that includes people being burned alive in their houses, being killed by swords and being run down. But also there are even stories of people being tied up and dragged behind sleighs through the snow, right? People being bound and thrown into the freezing Volkhov River. So Novgorod, it becomes an example, right? He is making an example of this city so that others are not going to be willing to stand up to him or to think about even defecting from Russia, right? This fear that if you stand up to Ivan or if you try and, leave Ivan, he will kill you. So at this point, I like to compare Ivan and Louis a little bit and how their strategies are different. And I kind of tie this to our discussion about Machiavelli as well. For one, Ivan is, using fear as his main tool. Whereas Louis, I think in a lot of ways, is using love as his tool. Ivan wants to kill anyone who he cannot trust. Louis wants the people he can't trust to be close to him. He wants them to be working for his favor. Louis has all these nobles who live in Versailles, and yes, Louis is keeping an eye on them and, in some ways spying on them, but in other ways, he is trying to be the center of attention. Louis wants these people to like him, right? And so this brings up that question, is it better to be feared or loved? Now, Niccolo Machiavelli, who wrote The Prince, he's the one who would say that it's better to be feared. He might say that Ivan's strategy is a good thing because he is able to keep the people in check. Machiavelli is famous for saying that if you try and just be loved, then people are going to be taking advantage of you. They're going to be able to walk all over you. Whereas if they fear you, they're going to be hesitant to stand up to you. And that really is what Ivan is doing. He is making these people fear him, and therefore they will not stand up against him. So just different strategies. Now, the problem is that for Ivan, his paranoia continues to grow. He becomes obsessed with betrayal and this fear of betrayal. His biggest concern is that people are going to turn against him. He doesn't trust those around him. He flies into fits of rage more and more often. And he gets to this point where this power that he has is so important to him, and this fear of betrayal is so important to him, that he is pushing away the people who care about him and who love him, even to the point where he kills his very own son, who's also named Ivan, because he became so heated while they were having a bit of an argument. And Ivan, I'll say the younger in this case, was trying to calm his father down. And Ivan the Terrible turned on him, hit him with his cane, and fatally wounded him. And so we have a situation where Ivan is so worried about protecting himself that he has no thoughts to protect others, and he does things that he maybe regrets. And so this is where that fear and love is, kind of, can you go too far with the fear? And that might be what happened here. Regardless, Ivan is a kind of a gray figure, right? In some ways, Ivan is really good. He helped to improve Russia. He helped to modernize Russia and help it gain some prominence among other European powers. At the same time, his fear of betrayal led him to be a bit of a tyrant, and it left a lot of people afraid of the Tsar. Now, following Ivan, Tsars are going to continue to use police forces to control nobles. And this is going to follow all the way to the last Tsars of Russia, which is in the 1900s, and even into the communist dictators like Joseph Stalin, even in some ways to today. But just kind of looking ahead, the next person we'll talk about is Peter the Great, who is going to learn a lot of lessons from Ivan and how to be a great ruler.